Hello, and welcome to the Brave New Weed podcast. And now, here's your host, Joe Dolce.
Thanks again for joining us on the Brave New Weed podcast. Before we kick off, I just want to remind everyone to help support us. And you can do this quickly and easily by visiting patreon.com/Brave New Weed. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get to the fun stuff. And I want to introduce Matthew Hendershot, my wonderful co-host.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for having me back.
You're a part of this, man.
Yeah, I know. It seemed like the right thing to say at the time. You know, touching on that Patreon thing, we are going to do our first contest here in a couple of weeks. We have the episode coming up.
What are we going to do?
Yeah, we got an episode coming up with the cocktail whisperer, Warren Bobrow, and we got a copy of his book, and he signed it for us. We're going to give it away to a lucky patron.
How much do they have to contribute?
$1.
They're in for $1 too, right?
If you go to patreon.com/Brave New Weed and you sign up, basically what we're going to do is we're going to pick a patron at random. Right now, you know, that number's pretty small, so I think your odds of winning, should you come on board now,
pretty good.
Pretty good chance of winning.
Okay, listeners, give us $1. It's $1.
And you know that $1's not for our pockets. It's honestly for us to continue to do this so that we can continue to get great guests, get people come on the air to share good information. I mean, it's really an investment in the show for you, our listeners.
And for information. I feel like we're on NPR doing a fundraiser drive now.
A little bit NPR-ish, actually. But, you know, you got to do it. You got to pay the bills.
All right, we've done it. Let's move on.
Let's do some news.
Okay.
So our first piece of news comes out of the Boston Globe, and it is an article with a kind of not shocking, not surprising headline, but very interesting. It says tobacco wholesalers want in on recreational.
So we've known this was they want marijuana. That's what they want to make, marijuana.
You think they'll go with marijuana, or you think they'll go with Marlboro Green?
I don't know what they're going to do. Let's just hope they don't do it, okay?
Well, this is a little bit different than...
Tell us about this. Go on.
Big tobacco. So what this is a push for a excise tax tracking company. The people who put the excise tax stamp on the pack of cigarettes that you buy in Massachusetts, they want in on Massachusetts marijuana sales. And it kind of is a little funky because it would require seed-to-sales type producers to literally sell their crop to a wholesaler so that it could be stamped and then buy it back to sell it in their dispensary.
Let's add more money, more bureaucracy, and no value for any of that.
I mean, that's all it is, right? This is a grab for a chunk of the money.
It's all the tobacco industry wants. Let's hope the tobacco industry has nothing to do with a healthful plant, with a plant that can actually help people as opposed to killing them.
Interestingly enough, the call came... it was a tobacco trade group that made its pitch to the Massachusetts legislatures. State Treasurer Deborah Goldberg got a phone call. It was 2 days after the vote cleared.
What vote?
The vote to legalize marijuana.
Are we surprised?
I'm not surprised at all. But this is a guy named Karen who is a lobbyist and working with a Swiss company called SICPA.
Just imagine having that shitty job, having to lobby for the tobacco industry to try to get their greedy mitts into cannabis.
I think that's all it is. All it is.
Just evil.
Yeah, I mean, that, and they know that their business is on the way out. It says here in the year 2000, Massachusetts retailers sold nearly 361 million packs of cigarettes. But in 2016, that number was down to 174 million.
That's like a 2/3 drop. Is that right?
That's... about half.
Good.
That's crazy.
People are smart.
While interesting to note, they're projecting that that by 2020, the marijuana business inside the state of Massachusetts should surpass $1 billion.
Good.
That's crazy. That's a lot of money.
Better than marijuana than tobacco at this point.
I hope so.
At least it's not going to kill people and up all of our healthcare costs if we have healthcare in 2020.
You know, the other piece of news that we're going to talk about is the big change of hands over at everybody's favorite weed magazine, High Times.
It's not been my favorite weed magazine for many, many years.
Oh, yeah?
As a matter of fact, I never really liked High Times.
Yeah?
No, it was like a magazine for skanky growers, white guys with long hair.
It's weird. It's like the Playboy of weed, right? There's always the centerfold
of buds.
Yeah, you
no,
like
they
cut
don't
it
even,
out, hang it on your wall.
They don't even do that anymore.
Really?
I mean, you don't look at it. You don't read it.
I
Don't
don't.
tell
I do
me it's
not.
your favorite magazine. You haven't read it in
The
years.
proverbial everybody. I've never read a High Times magazine. I've seen them, but
Yeah, there's a reason it got sold. What's the amazing thing is, though, it got sold for $70 million.
so what do you think happens? Do you think they turn a corner? Does it become an informational magazine about the cannabis business, or do they just continue to be the Playboy of pot?
They can't continue. They're a grower magazine right now for white guys, basically, skinny white guys who grow. And they can't continue doing that. I mean, obviously, if you're going to go into the digital era, you have to provide some utility. Well, first you have to be entertaining, and then you got to provide some utility. So our guest this week is Mara Gordon. Mara runs a collective in California called Aunt Zelda's. And what's interesting about Mara is she was a process engineer for most of her life. She had some bad accidents, suffered a lot of pain, started using cannabis. And over the last 5 or 6 years, she's really specialized in certain forms of cancer, using cannabis to treat certain forms of cancer, particularly glioblastoma, which is a very quick killing brain cancer, and also some in breast cancer. This is really cutting edge stuff. She works with oncologists in California. She's been doing studies. She's been tracking her results. So it's great she's able to join us today. She's a very busy woman. She's got patients all over the world, all over the country, calling her for advice and counsel. And we're very happy to have her here. When we first met, we met in a private community in the East Bay where you lived. And you and Stuart, your husband, were cooking up some cannabis oil. And there were all these seniors who kept coming into the house, looking at the flowers and smelling them and talking about Blue Dream versus, I don't know, OG something. And there you were cooking up this oil. It was an image that has forever stayed in my mind. The fact that in your kitchen you were making this stuff. That was about, 4 years ago, I think. Do you still make cannabis oil in your kitchen?
No, we don't. But I can have you, I will just say that we were making it initially in our kitchen, but our kitchen had been insured by Lloyd's of London because it was so sterile. And we were actually stopped creating food in our kitchen, and we only were making oil in our kitchen. So it actually went from being a home kitchen to a commercial one just within our house. Right.
Fantastic. So, I always love the idea that you started in this game from your own issues with pain and difficulty, and that you're basically one of the great cancer treaters with cannabis oil, and you're also a Jewish grandmother.
Yes, I am. I recommend cannabis and chicken soup.
So let me just ask you, can cannabis cure cancer?
Cannabis cannot cure cancer. In fact, there is no such thing as a cure for cancer. Having said that, though, cannabis can kill cancer cells, which frankly is what you really want to have happen.
That's really what you want to have happen. It's true. Yeah. And we all know there's about, 300 different types of cancer. So what are the types of cancer cells that it actually works most effectively on?
Well, interestingly enough, it works the most effectively on some of the cancers that are the most difficult to reach with allopathic medicines.
Certain brain cancers?
Certain brain cancers, exactly. Certain breast cancers, certain pancreatic cancers. I mean, come on. I mean, these are diagnoses that are, especially like a GBM, glioblastoma multiforme, which is a brain tumor, which they call the Terminator.
Because it works so fast. It really works quickly, right?
Right. It kills quickly. And then, pancreatic cancer, which is a death sentence in most cases, that we're finding phenomenal benefits of using cannabinoid therapies. And that's personal to me because my own father died of pancreatic cancer. So.
What about skin cancer? Because it always seemed to me that would be an obvious choice.
Absolutely. There's 3 primary types of skin cancer. You have basal, squamous, and melanoma. Basal cell, especially early stage, it's pretty much straightforward. You treat it with some of the full plant extract, and cover it. And over a period of time, it's like you can, before your own eyes, you can see the cells come to the surface and slough off. With squamous cell, you have to be a little bit more careful. You need to make sure that it's localized. And with a melanoma, you still use it with the topical application, but you have to do something systemically just because of the way the melanoma works within your body. So
you have to take it internally.
People that say, I have a skin cancer, so I'm just going to use this. I'm like, well, what kind of skin cancer?
I would like to cycle back on something, if I could, that you mentioned. And you'd said that you were seeing great success in treating cancer and in the killing of cancer cells. Can you elaborate? Can you share with us like one of your biggest success stories?
Sure. I'll just give an example. We have a patient who came to us in hospice. She was. We also treat a lot of the elderly, and we treat a lot of children, and then of course in between. But this happened to be a little 2-year-old that had a astrocytoma, which is a form of a brain tumor, and she was in hospice, and her mom just desperately wanted her to get out of pain. And so she was just, desperate for something because the child was beating her head against the wall and she was suffering so dramatically. So I said, well, the very least we can do is start treating her for the side effects of this brain tumor. And at that point, the doctors had determined that there was not even any point in doing any kind of chemotherapy or radiation because it couldn't be reached and she was a lost cause. So we were just looking at really palliative care at that point. Well, lo and behold, we started her on the cannabis, and the pain went away immediately, and the tumor started shrinking. And so the doctor said, wait a minute, let's take a look at this. Maybe it's worth doing chemotherapy now. So they went ahead and did the standard care along with it, and that was in February of 2014, I want to say, and she's still going strong.
Isn't that amazing?
So that's just one example of one who, as far as they were concerned, was on her way out, and here she's still among us.
This idea of killing cancer cells, there's actually a word for it. It's called apoptosis. It almost somehow causes them to commit suicide. Is that correct, Mara?
That is correct. That is correct. Now, there is also another form of cell death that takes place that's FG, that's, without going into all of that, so that there are other ways that cancer cells are destroyed. And there's also things like blocking the angiogenesis, so there's no blood supply to the tumors and all those sorts of things. And cannabis is really effective when you activate those CB1 and CB2 receptors, which is how the endocannabinoid system is actually activated within the body. The resulting cell death is truly profound, but it's not voodoo science or some kind of miracle. It's understandable and explainable by, molecular biologists and chemists.
Yeah, there's enough research on this to show that.
Yes.
What is interesting, though, is when I first came upon this idea of cannabis oil treating cancer, it was through Rick Simpson oil. Which is almost like a happy accident in a way. I mean, you want to talk about Rick Simpson oil? It's a high dose of extract, like 1,000 milligrams a day, isn't it?
Well, that's a very good question, because Rick Simpson talks about 1 gram a day, but he doesn't talk about how many milligrams of cannabinoids. He's talking about a volume of oil.
That's
right. It's very questionable, and it's a kind of a meaningless number, because if it's low quality oil that only has 30% cannabinoids in it, you could take 1 gram, but you're only going to get 300 milligrams. Or it could yeah. That's why it's just it's nebulous. And so
it's very nebulous.
Yeah. The other thing that Rick Simpson oil says is that it's made with naphtha or butane. Which are certainly, we don't want people making their own oil with paint thinner or something that you fill your cigarette lighter with. Those are not medicinal solvents.
Period. Those are just not medicinal.
They just are not medicinal. Garbage in, garbage out. I don't care how well you purge it, unless you're a big giant, pharmaceutical quality manufacturing laboratory. I wouldn't trust anything that came out of somebody's, garage. And then you start looking at how he's making it and cooking it off in a rice cooker. I mean, it's just, the whole thing is so
18th century.
unprofessional, inconsistent, not, it's not the kind of medicine that you're going to want your mother or your grandmother or your child using.
No, it's 18th century. I mean, it really is. It's boil, boil, cauldron, trouble, right? It's so old-fashioned to think about that. And also, 1,000 milligrams a day, that is a heavy dose, isn't it?
It's a heavy dose, and it's also, it's saying that all cancers are treated the same, all patients are treated the same, and the one thing that we know for sure is that is just not the case. I have cancer patients that are doing quite well on a total of 100 milligrams of combined cannabinoids a day. I have other patients that are on 500. I don't have anybody on 1,000. I have had, like, for example, one of our better known patients that I'm free to talk about because he's very, very public and has been given permission is Chico Ryder. Chico had rhabdomyosarcoma, which is a very severe form of cancer, and he had a feeding tube. His chemotherapies were horrible. He barely made it through, but because he was on cannabis, he didn't miss a single one. He didn't get opportunistic infections. He did great. But because it was going through the feeding tube, the bioavailability of the medicine was lowered, so we had to have him on a much higher dose to equal the same as if he'd used it sublingually.
Now, being that you work in California, which has had a medical program for over 20 years, are you getting oncologists working with you at this point, or is there still a lot of resistance from the medical community?
Yes and yes. Yes, we're getting a lot of oncologists that are working with us, and yes, there's a lot of resistance from the medical community. I had a physician that was at my office on Monday, and he said, "Wait a minute now, are you telling me that this can actually kill cancer cells?" And I just looked at him and I was like, okay, where have you been for the last 20 years?
Maybe not in California.
Maybe
he's been in our state of New York.
Maybe just not paying attention.
Oh my God! All right.
Right. So
if you're not reading this stuff, if you're not following this stuff, where are you going to hear it in the mainstream press? And where's the doctor going to hear it? Where's the doctor going to hear about it?
Right.
Not from a pharmaceutical company, right?
Absolutely. And and we all live in this little bubble where we all think that, oh my gosh, everybody knows this, but then you step right out of the bubble and it's all new information. So we do have I'll give you an example with Dr. Noah Fetterman, who is one of the leading sarcoma specialists in the world. He's UCLA. We actually treat quite a few of his patients. And he had one little boy in particular who had a liver transplant as a result of hepatic carcinoma. And when the cancer came back, just as we predicted it would, because you can't get rid of cancer by cutting out an organ, and it came back in his lungs, that he was going to start chemotherapy on this little boy. And his mom said, wait a minute, I'm going to talk to Mara. And we met with our doctors, and we ended up starting him on a protocol. And then when he went in the following Monday to start the chemotherapy, they did blood work first, which is part of the protocol that they always do to make sure that you're healthy enough before they poison you. And all of his markers had come down, and the doctor said, wait a minute, I'm not starting chemo. Let's just wait and see. And that's been over 2 years, and this little boy is still on cannabis and has not had to go on chemo.
Wow.
So, I mean, this is, I mean, so now he's sending a group of 6 pediatric oncology nurses to come and train with us.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. I mean,
that's amazing.
All of these statements, they're like jaw-dropping. I mean, I know we're coasts apart, but we're sitting here agape hearing you tell these stories. How is this such an unknown entity still in the world if these things are this powerful in the world of cancer treatment?
Can you answer that question? Because I can't.
I think I can. I think I can take a stab at it. One of the reasons that I think that is because modern medicine is built around the idea of the single molecule. That's number
medicine.
one.
Yeah, the single molecule medicine.
Single molecule medicine. Thank you very much, Bayer aspirin. Okay? It's built around the single molecule, not the whole plant. And that's why, for example, people, I'm just going to do a segue here. People talk about how Israel is the center of all research, blah, blah, blah. I completely disagree, because I think what Israel is trying to do is create a bunch of single molecule formulations so that they can basically become pharmaceuticals. That is not how you treat serious diseases with cannabis. It depends upon the whole plant. You have 144 that we know of different cannabinoids, approximately 400 terpenes in the medicine, and you look at a pharmaceutical company or a medical professional or whatever, and they're going to go, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know how to dose that. I'm clueless. So they don't even know where to begin. The other thing is they talk about consistency, repeatability, etc. And when you have a plant, the top flowers on a plant are going to be different from the middle and the bottom. How do you standardize that to make a scalable medicine for people? It's challenging. And so instead of saying, you know what, we're up for the challenge, they say, the heck with this, I'm not doing it. It's not good. It's terrible medicine.
It doesn't fit their modality. It doesn't fit the medical mindset. Just doesn't fit it.
So how do you do it then? When you assess a patient's need and in essence prescribe them a treatment, how do you go through assessing the whole plant and these 144 cannabinoids and 400 plus terpenes to figure out what it is they need based on their condition?
That's a small question, isn't it?
That's a very small question. So one of the things that we do is that we look at, obviously we are not testing for 144 cannabinoids and 400 terpenes. We're not doing that right now. But we do have a very good idea of what the major cannabinoids and terpenes are in our medicines. We also know the health benefits of those that are identified. For example, we know what, THC, THCA, CBD, CBDA, CBG, CBGA, et cetera, on the cannabinoid side. On the terpene side, we're very clear on what their health benefits and properties and potential side effects are. So we know, for example, and by the way, Joe, there's no way you were at my house and got an OG anything.
Because, That's true.
Yeah. So
good point.
Yeah, because
it was Pepe Le Pew. It was Pepe Le Pew.
Absolutely. So because I don't work with OG because of a lot of the problems with it. But
such as what? Like what?
Well, just like we're talking about, and why I brought it up here is a true OG Kush is going to be very high in alpha and beta pinene, and those two terpenes can cause severe anxiety and jitteriness in people. Now, if you have ADHD or PTSD, it might be the perfect chemovar for you. But when you're treating cancer, you don't want to give somebody a high dose of something that can cause anxiety. All right. We also find that some of the profiles of the plants, like the ones that have more linalool and myrcene and limonene, are the ones that we go towards more for treating cancer patients.
So those are the smells that are common in lavender, cloves. What was the third one you said? Linalool, myrcene, and
limonene, which would be in
lemon.
Exactly.
Just to help people talk your language a little bit. And these are really the reasons we can identify strains through our noses, is when these terpenes are in such prevalence. Correct?
Yes. I mean, THC doesn't have a smell.
Right.
In fact, those dogs are trained to smell beta-caryophyllene.
That's right.
Which is
that's the back smell of pepper. Yeah, that's the smell of clove or pepper. Yeah. Yep. But today they're trained to smell the stuff that bombs are made of. They're not really training dogs for black pepper anymore. Yeah.
Exactly.
They're not really training dogs for the same. Exactly. And that's a good thing, I think. Let the dogs stop smelling for beta-caryophyllene, right?
Well, I think it depends on what part of the airport you're in. If you're coming into customs, there's still the dogs that smell for that stuff.
No, they're not.
They're not.
No, they're not. You're wrong. I talked to TSA about this.
Right. Yeah, because I travel almost full time. And they are not, I mean, I've had many a dog come and sniff me right after I'd taken a hit. So off of my vaporizer pen. And so there's no way, and I always, I'm almost always carrying something because it's my medicine. It's not recreational for me. It is my serious medicine. So yeah, and I mean, those dogs, they sniff me and they keep walking.
Tell us how you began this journey, please. What were you doing? What was your life like? How did you get into?
Well, my past life, I was a process engineer, but I had actually stopped working, for a living kind of thing back in 2003 because of my health issues. And back years before in 96, I had bacterial spinal meningitis that had left me with some pretty significant deficits. And they just kept getting worse and worse over the years. And finally, I had to stop working. Well, the medical community, their response to my problems was to stick me on a whole bunch of different pharmaceuticals, including fentanyl patch, Neurontin, methadone, Norco, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At one point I was having to sleep with oxygen at night because my respiration was so retarded from all the opioids that I would stop breathing. So, I mean, it was just awful. And when I first was found out that I was going to be a grandmother, I decided it was time to get off of all these medications and get my life back, because they really don't help with pain anyway. They just make you feel, groggy all the time and so you're in pain and sleepy. Well, I needed something, and Stuart, my husband, needed something. He's a sober alcoholic, and he had broken his back and had to have surgery, and there was nothing out there for him as an option other than opioids, and he refused to use those. So we started investigating cannabis as an option after a friend of ours mentioned that she made brownies for her boyfriend, who was a long haul trucker, and he had a bad neck, and I was like, you're kidding. I had no idea. So we went to a very large dispensary here that was, really the nicest, certainly at the time. And the options that we were given were Rice Krispie treats, brownies, and caramel corn. And, no dosing information, no lab results, no idea what was in it. In fact, the Rice Krispie treat had a piece of masking tape on it that said 5 to 20 doses. So not a lot of information.
It's not vague at all.
5 to 20 doses.
Exactly. Yeah. So I said, well, so being who I am, I was weighing each piece, and I was recording the times taken, and then how long till it took effect, and then what the experience was, how long till it wore off. And the one thing that I discovered is it was all over the place. There was nothing consistent or predictable about it. So I just said, I can do better, and I'm going to figure out this whole dosing thing. So, I didn't know anybody at the time in California who grew cannabis, which is pretty hilarious when you think about it. And so
you really were a Jewish grandmother. Yeah, she really was a Jewish grandmother.
Exactly. Now I know so many people that grow, it's unreal. But at the time, I didn't know anybody. And so I went to Oregon and got a legal card and bought 2 ounces of XXX Chem Dog and came back and infused it into some oil. And in my kitchen, in my what we call our magic pan, which is this beautiful stainless pan that I've been using for over 30 years. And because then I had the oil, and so I was looking for a recipe that used a lot of oil, and I came across my Aunt Zelda's carrot cake recipe. And so I was infusing it and then putting it in the carrot cake. And that's how the Aunt Zelda thing came to be. But, and then
how was
very
that carrot
quickly
cake?
I love carrot cake. But it became very clear that I didn't need to put it in the carrot cake. I just needed to have the oil, and we could dose with the oil and be much more accurate.
And thus Aunt
and
Zelda's
thus-
was born.
And thus Aunt Zelda's was born. And from the
Fantastic.
very beginning, everyone we met, it was like, okay, you can, because people were like, I want your oil and this and that. It's like, you can only have it if you give me back data. I want the feedback. I want to know how much you're using, how it's working, what's your latest, blood work and scans. And so it was like, you can have it. I mean, we gave it all away for free for over the first year, and then lost on it for the next probably couple of years until Stuart went on strike and said, I'm not paying anybody anymore to use our medicine. So,
A wise move.
Yeah.
So, you once told me that cancer really turns you on. It's the thing that really excites you. And it sounds like a really tough gig. Is it still exciting you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's fascinating to me because we all have cancer cells within our body. Some of them take off and others don't. Some have natural apoptosis and others don't. Why? That's part of it. And the other thing is there anything that we can do to avoid it happening? In fact, I just came from a woman that I just met with who I'm designing a study for a group of women to see if they use this, what's going to happen on their overall health, to see if we can improve just their quality of life. But, I lost my mother, my sister, my father, my first husband, my brother-in-law, my best friend, and that's just all right in my first, all to cancer, and all young. So it's a very personal subject for me.
And you're dealing with it in a very personal way.
I'm dealing
In
with
a very
it
professional way. How many patients, last question, how many patients have you treated in your years doing this?
Directly with our medicines, probably about 1,500. But who we've consulted with as far as their treatment plans, thousands. Because, as long as we have lab results associated with the medicine, we can help dose anyone's medicine.
So people can reach you from out of state and consult with you. How do they reach you? What's the best way for them to reach you?
To reach us for our medicine, certainly in California, auntzeldas.org is the easiest way. And then to see one of our doctors who have been working with all these patients and coming up with, helping on the dosing protocols, you can go to calispringwellness.com. And in fact, if you're at Aunt Zelda's, you go and if you select consultation, it'll take you over to their website.
Very good. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask before we let you go about, obviously, California has just recently legalized the legalized. Are you guys looking forward toward anything in the recreational landscape with this, or you are bullseyeing in on defeating cancer and that's good enough for you?
We are 100% committed to the medical side of things. We don't just treat cancer, but it is in fact what we mostly treat because it's like people talk in waiting rooms. But as far as the recreational side, it doesn't really hold any interest for me at all. The fact that we both use the same raw plant is kind of where it all ends. I am very concerned about the proposed regulations on the medical side of things in California. In fact, we just have formally drafted a response that we're going to submit because the guidelines show a complete lack of understanding of the medical use. They have things like 10 milligrams per serving as a limit, 100 milligrams per package. Well, if I have somebody with, HER2 positive breast tumor, she might be on 300 milligrams of cannabinoids a day. What is she going to do? Open 30 packages to take her medicine? It just shows a lack of understanding. So
it's a response to those 1,000 milligram chocolate bars, isn't it?
Exactly, but it's showing that they didn't really do any investigating. So they're depending on people like us to come in and tell them where they've screwed up. Hopefully.
Good. Well, It's good you're there.
I hope that they listen. If not, it's going to be quite a burden for patients.
They're going to listen to you. Why do I know that? What about you? Do I know that? Thanks for talking to us. It was great.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you. Anytime.
that was a great interview, and we're going to have Mara back for more. We want to talk about terpenes. We want to talk more about the fact that cannabis kills cancer cells. I mean, come on, you can't get around the amazement of that, right?
That's nothing short of miraculous. I mean, and I don't throw that word around lightly.
You shouldn't.
I don't think about that stuff. But when you're talking about cannabis patients who don't even qualify for chemo, and then bringing them back to the point where they don't even need chemo, that's miraculous.
It is. It is extraordinary. So let's hope that the research continues and that they can actually get some clinical data here so that this can give people a little hope. Anyway, all we want is a little hope, really, right?
Yeah.
On our next episode, we have a great interview with a former football player, Marvin Washington, who played for a lot of pro teams and has now become a cannabis advocate. He's witnessed a lot of suffering, a lot of crazy stuff about players and how the pro leagues are stepping over and hiding a lot of the injuries that these players have, and how a large percent of them are using cannabis to mitigate their pain, but also think that it might be useful for a lot of the head injuries that they suffer. I mean, Marvin will tell us that people are suffering dozens of head injuries just in one game.
Yeah, well, and it's a massive thing. NFL just settled with a bunch of former players over a big loss.
Was that $1 billion?
It was a very big number. I don't know exactly how much, but it's definitely got to be talked about, and especially when you're talking about the waning numbers of the viewership of pro sports. I mean, you got a lot of stuff out there. It's growing unhealthy, and if you can't protect the players, you can't have a good performance on the field. People are going to stop watching, and it's just going to cause nothing but a downward spiral.
So we're going to talk to Marvin a lot of those issues, and how he's trying to get some movement in the NFL to look at some of these alternative therapies. It's a really interesting interview. He's a great guy.
Thanks for listening to the Brave New Weed podcast. This episode and all future episodes are made possible by amazing listeners like yourself. If you like what you've heard, we encourage you to show your support by giving $1 a month for special access and rewards on patreon.com/bravenewweed. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram via @bravenewweed. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/bravenewweed. And remember, you can always find more information about us or information discussed in each episode by pointing your favorite browser to bravenewweed.com.